the karakia, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina, ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tiho, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Kua hui mai nei tēnei wā, tēnā koutou, ko te mihi tuatahi ki ngā kaimahi I LIANZA, tēnā koutou, thank you for being our host today. Ko te mihi tuarua ki ngā Cartoons and Comics Advisory Panel, tēnā koutou. Ko te mihi tuatoru ki a koutou katoa ko Sam tōku ingoa, he kaipupuri tuarua o Waituhi Whakakāta me ngā puka Waituhi at the Te Puna Mātauranga o Aotearoa. My name is Sam. I'm the Assistant Curator of Cartoons and Comics at the Alexander Turnbull Library as part of the National Library of New Zealand. I'm hosting the panel today with our lovely Cartoons and Comics Advisory Group. We have one missing person, Kay, and who is unable to join us today, and I think Anna is on her way. But basically, I just wanted a chance to talk cartoons and comics within LIANZA and to talk about the power of them. The Cartoon Archive was originally set up in 1992, and we officially expanded the scope to include both cartoons and comics in 2020, which is when my role was established, and the new Cartoons and Comics Advisory Group was established as well. I thought that today we'll introduce the panelists and then we'll get into a discussion on the power of cartoons and comics, and particularly ways that they can be used as kind of processing and exploring complex ideas and trauma and diversity within them. So I'll get our advisory group members to introduce themselves and say a little bit about the work that they do. We'll start with Michel because he's top of my screen.
Cool. Ma'aloha lesoi fua mau me le langi mama. My name is Michel Mulipola. I'm a Samoan comic book artist and illustrator, professional wrestler, professional gamer, professional storylines driver, story artist and cultural consultant for Disney Animation Studios. Yeah, and all-around shit stirrer. So yeah, part of the National Library's Cartoon and Comics Advisory Group, which is awesome because they need brown people like myself and Zach, so we're the token guys. They're here to keep you guys in check, so thank you.
Thanks, Michel. Zach, do you want to head up next?
Tēnā koutou katoa, he uri ahau I te tai rāwhiti, ko Rongowhakaata, ko Ngāti Porou, ko Ngāti Kahungunu, ko Ngāti Ruapani, oku iwi, ko Waipara te whānau, ko Zak tōku ngā. Kia ora everyone, I'm the other token guy, as Michel alluded to. My name's Zak. I have had a variety of roles over the past years. I've done worked at the New Zealand Herald as a editorial graphic artist for quite a long time. I've done some animation stuff for Māori TV. I've illustrated picture books, and these days I'm lecturing in digital media at AUT. And I'm most interested in, I guess, bringing more Māori perspectives through in terms of comics, so that whether that's talking about them in a kind of academic forum or whether it's non-fiction material or just generally making comic stories. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Zach. And Dylan.
Koto. My name's Dylan Horrocks, and I've been drawing comics for, oh God, decades, a very long time. And I've got a few graphic novels out. Hicksville is probably the best known one, which in New Zealand is published by Te Herenga Waka University Press. but I've also worked in lots of areas of comics, including drawing political comic strips for the Listener and writing superhero comics for DC and so on. These days, I'm teaching at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, in the School of Design. And so I have the enormous privilege of being a cheerleader while the next generation of cartoonists learns to spill ink on paper and spread pixels across screens. It's a really, really exciting job, and I'm really enjoying it. That's me.
Wonderful. So this particular talk today, I'm hoping that you've all come along already aware that the power of cartoons and comics as historical documents, as well as things that are important for libraries and documentary heritage organisations. And I thought that maybe we go a little bit deeper with the conversation today to talk around what exactly the power of cartoons and comics are when we're looking at as tools for dealing with complexity or encouraging critical thinking, and the potential home for really inclusive and diverse storytelling, particularly in Aotearoa. So this is the topic for today. Hopefully it's kind of come out of conversations that we've had within the Cartoons and Comics Advisory Group, and it just felt like we were having these really wonderful, rich conversations within a small room, and I wanted to share it further to encourage more people to think about the power of cartoons and comics, but also just to be aware of the exciting things that are happening within Aotearoa as well. So I think we'll just kind of dive right in. I was going to start off with some lighter questions around like what excites you about cartoons and comics, but actually think that we're ready just to kind of head on into thinking about cartoons and comics that tackle that complexity, and whether you have some examples about dealing with that complexity or trauma for the people listening today. One of the things that I was thinking about when thinking about examples was Rachel Smythe's Lore Olympus, which is a webtoon comic. It exists online as well as in print, and is one of the most read comics in the world at this point. It also happens to be created by Rachel, who lives in Christchurch, and it's a retelling of Persephone's and Hades, but it also kind of is set within the romance genre and YA fiction kind of oeuvre, and also kind of deals with a lot of complexity around sexual violence, relationship dynamics, and domestic abuse, as well as mental health and mental illness, and the impacts of trauma on Persephone as she's kind of unraveling what has happened to her. And I think it's a really beautiful way that Rachel is able to tell those stories in a way that's kind of very relatable. So that's my example. I'll flip over to our panel. Michel, I'm going to put you in the deep end first, but do you have any examples that come to mind when you're thinking about this stuff?
Yeah, it kind of froze there for a moment. You guys can hear me though? Yeah, kind of weird. Okay. Yeah, I guess talking about cartoons, tackling complexity. One of the ones that I've been seeing, especially on Instagram, is children's illustrator Sally Samir, who's been making cartoons using quotes from Palestinian children and parents around just a whole bunch of the fucked up stuff. And every time I see those cartoons and stuff, like obviously I get pretty emotional, and it really draws to the heart of the power of cartoons and comics and visual medium in general, where they say a picture paints 1,000 words. Seeing a visual really kind of burrows into deep into your emotions and into your heart. And so that's why just like that, and instantaneously, right? Like with reading, you got to take time to read and digest, but with a visual, it really cuts to the heart of the narrative and the issue. And so I think that's why cartoons and comics are so, so revered in terms of a storytelling medium, especially for myself. That's why I love it, is that visual visceralness of it all. So that's kind of why I feel like cartoons and comics are a great medium to tackle complex issues and all kinds of things, and even lighthearted stuff. But so that's kind of for me.
Zach, I see you nodding along as well.
Yeah, just following on from that, I think, the power of comic storytelling is that it can tackle almost anything. And obviously it can, in the case of Lore Olympus, it can use the idea of something removed, metaphor or metaphorical legend to kind of, on one surface, present something that might just be seen as entertainment, but then underneath it's got all these kind of interesting themes that it's dealing with. There have been examples of, and Dylan might expand on this a bit more, but like manga like Barefoot Gen, sort of dealing with kind of horrors or the sort of fallout of war. This journalistic graphic novels that Joe Sacco's produced, like Sefer Garaja and topically Palestine, and just being able to, I don't know, present these things in a way that people can kind of get to grips with them. I think at the heart of comics is the idea that it can take large issues or large ideas, and simply because of the format of a comic, it can break those down into like little stages. So it takes a complex idea and turns it into kind of little blocks of information, which essentially, I guess, is what someone does when they write a prose story or some kind of non-fiction thing in the newspaper, but it leverages the power of having the image there as well. And you basically receiving the information and sort of in two formats. And that's, I think, is where the success of it lies. And conversely, I think you can take maybe quite a simple idea and add layers of complexity, vice versa. So, it's a wonderful medium, obviously. We're all here because we like doing this stuff. But, I just think it's incredibly powerful.
So, just everyone has mentioned the accessibility of comics, the way that they can reach readers who wouldn't necessarily otherwise be able to face reading a complex journalistic account or something, and also the power of images, which can have a really visceral impact. I just want to mention two other aspects and mention some examples. I think one of the useful things about images is something that some academics, now that I'm in the academic world, call thick description. The idea that an image can describe things in a really complex way, in a way that words can't necessarily do. That you can capture in a drawing certain things that even the artist might not be fully aware that they're capturing. And it creates a very complex kind of story that you're telling, even though it can be incredibly readable and accessible. But within that, below that surface, there's just so much rich complexity. And the other aspect of it that I think is really relevant to this is that they're a very intimate form. Reading comics, it feels a little bit like climbing inside someone's head. The drawings have been made by this person. It's like dipping into their personal sketchbook or diary a lot of the time. If you were reading a memoir and you were actually reading the original handwritten manuscript with little drawings on the side, that's what it feels like to me. reading comics that someone's writing about, drawing about their own lives. And a New Zealand example that I just wanted to mention is an artist in Auckland, Lisa Wilram Sierblom. I'm probably mispronouncing that last name. Lisa was born in Korea and then adopted, very young, adopted to a family in Sweden, and grew up having a really rough time as an adoptee. And she's done an extraordinary graphic memoir telling the story of that, but also using it as a chance to really explore the experience of adoptees and how complex that can be and how difficult it can be. And it's partly agitprop. She's also using it to persuade us to think about inter-country adoption in a different way. But she does it in this way that's really, you feel like you're kind of inside her life. She even includes documents and stuff from her exploration, trying to track down her family. And that, I think that intimacy is very, very powerful. And it allows people to tell not just big picture stories, like Art Spiegelman's book, Mouse, which tells the story of his family's experience in the Holocaust, or Joe Sacco's journalistic comics, or Toby Morris's journalistic comics in New Zealand. But it also is perfect for telling extremely potent personal stories. And many cartoonists have used that to process their own complicated feelings about things. Jim Yoshioka is a Wellington-based cartoonist who's done a series of beautiful comics in which she's exploring her own relationship with her Japanese heritage as a Japanese New Zealander. And by doing the comics, she's really kind of working through her feelings about it. And she comes out at the end of the process feeling differently. And I see my students doing that all the time. Every year, I have a number of students whose comics are them not just telling the story of something really heavy that happened in their lives, but also using that process to try and understand it and move forward in their relationship with it. So it's just a super powerful way to do it.
Yeah, I think that the power of them to tell personal stories is something that comes through both in memoir comics, and we see them when COVID happened, that lots of cartoonists just went and did their kind of COVID day-to-day expressions of themselves. But I also think it comes through in times when we're trying to grapple with really tricky subjects. Michel, you mentioned Palestine, and I feel like my Twitter feeds and my Instagrams and all of the social media are filled with people who are trying to express their outrage or their upsetness or their complex feelings about that situation. And I think there's something about the immediacy of comics that draws you to that. Do anyone want to respond around that stuff?
Yeah, I guess, like any kind of art form, comics, visuals, writing and stuff, it's a way for us, it's a conduit for us to express ourselves. And when we feel something so deeply, we have to let it out, and art is that catharsis. And for me, I've been feeling a lot, especially with the situation, and I have drawn many images and stuff, and it's been great to kind of see people feeling those same, like there's a bond in terms of like art expressing the way people feel. They can't quite put words to it. And again, so yeah, for me, I've just been expressing myself very, very loudly, as I usually do. And it's been great, particularly this Samoan version of the Palestinian flag that I created. That's been that's been really great in terms of having not only Samoans kind of finally have something they can kind of use as a symbol for their solidarity with Palestinians, but having Palestinians and Muslim people come up to me and thanking me for creating it, because it's just been going viral, which is cool. But like, I didn't create it for virility. I created it because this is how I felt, and that shared pain and shared anger that everyone's thing has been able to be funneled into like this artwork as a way to just go, this is how I feel. So yeah.
I wish Anna had arrived, but my next question is around kind of the changing role of editorial cartooning within New Zealand. That because of the way that newspapers are and there's less print media, there's less kind of editorial cartooning that is in existence compared to, you know, every regional newspaper used to have a regional cartoonist who would do a daily cartoon, and now I feel like that's being put into social media where people are responding and creating visual mediums, visual kind of cartoons and comics online instead. And I can think of, you know, Daniel Vernon, who does Ye How the Boys, is kind of taking up some of that space, and Huriana Kopeke Te Aho as well. But this is a kind of swerve, but I wonder about the role of humour in that as well. When we are tackling kind of deeply horrific things, there's a place for anger and powerful images that do that, but there's also space that I feel like cartoons almost uniquely can take up around satire and humour as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of like political editorial cartooning, like they're still amazing, but now with like the proliferation of memes is online, people are able to kind of express similar sentiments through political cartooning without having to, you know, go through the effort of thing. Like they're able to take screenshots and add captions and stuff. So I think memeing has kind of like allowed just anyone to be able to express their way in very similar ways that political cartooning does. You know, but again, when you see, you know, really amazing political cartoons, you're like, you can't meme that. Like, you know, that's one of those things that. But yeah, for I think general public, memeing has become their way of political cartooning, I would say, you know, in terms of that.
I think that there are some really great political cartoonists active at the moment in the newspapers, including in New Zealand. We have Sharon Murdoch here, who's doing extraordinary work that's, you know, really world class. And Sharon does use humour very, very effectively. Like I do think political. I mean, I've done a bit of political cartooning over the years too, and it's really hard because you feel passionately about something and you want your readers to feel passionately about it too. And sometimes you use humour as a way to guide people into that. Sometimes you use it to kind of get the reader to drop their defences. Sometimes you use it just to straight out mock the people who you want to mock. But it can undermine what you're trying to achieve as well. And I remember years ago talking to Trace Hodgson when he was drawing for The Listener as their main political cartoonist. And he was going through a bit of an existential crisis about being a political cartoonist, because he said, it doesn't matter what I do, I can be so mean and rude and ruthless to these politicians, they still want to buy the original art to put on their wall. It's like something is not working here. And after a while, you start to realize that this can become just part of their publicity machine, you know, based on that idea that no publicity is bad publicity. And there are politicians who lean into that. You know, they try to turn themselves into a caricature because it makes them instantly recognizable. So I do think it's a difficult form, and I mean difficult partly in terms of its ethical complexity. It's a very, and political cartooning has for generations built its visual languages out of stereotypes and tropes, and often those are really racist stereotypes. They're incredibly sexist and so on. I mean, New Zealand has a very long tradition of extremely racist cartooning. So I think humour can be used as a very powerful weapon, but it's also the fact that we're using humour to express opinions isn't an excuse to ignore the complex ways in which it can go very, very wrong. And the best political cartoonists, in my opinion, are the ones who are very conscious of that, and they use their tools with a feeling, with great power comes great responsibility. They kind of are aware of that, the pitfalls and dangers there. But the other thing I think we're all kind of agreeing that social media is now where those visual conversations take place most powerfully and effectively at the moment, assuming that we still have social media in a few years with the current meltdown of many of the platforms. But one of the examples that I keep remembering is when the awful mosque shooting happened in, oh God, when even was that now? 2019. Within a few hours, a young artist in New Zealand who was working at her day job drew a picture and put it on Instagram, which was just her personal response to what was happening. Ruby Jones was the name of the artist, and she drew, you probably have all seen it, it was the drawing of two women hugging, one of them wearing a scarf, and I think it said below, now I'm suddenly blanking on what it said below, someone will remember, but that image, within hours of that event happening, that image just spread right around the world, and within a week it was being held up by Muslim students in New York City at public meetings. It was being projected onto the wall of a giant building in Dubai. It was, so many people responded to it so powerfully. And here in New Zealand, the thing that struck me is that every memorial event I went to, and every little memorial on the side of the street that someone had created, someone had left that image, but usually they'd drawn it themselves. So they'd hand copied the image, they hadn't just printed it out. So that the power of people's response to it was quite extraordinary. Oh, thank you for sharing that in the chat, Sam. And I feel like we really have to take seriously what's happening on social media as a way of visually engaging with what's happening, because it's just there's never been a medium before that has quite the same instant global impact. It's really extraordinary. And New Zealand cartoonists are right in there. They really are using it well.
Zak, did you want to comment as well?
I'm not sure I can add much more to that, but just I think something that there's a couple of things, I guess, and that's that all editorial cartoons have to go through some kind of editorial process. So they actually have to be submitted, vetted. They might get changed. I've worked in the newsroom, so I sort of know what can go on. So I suppose one thing about social media is that you can sidestep all of that if you like. You're not required to answer to anyone. You can make stuff, it can be put out there immediately. And I think comics is one of those mediums that in many ways is a fairly democratic art form, and that anyone should be able to do it. Although for some reason a lot of people don't, and I'm not quite sure why that is. Like, anyone should be able to pick up a pen and a piece of paper and translate. And it, you know, like, maybe we have put limitations around what we think is acceptable in terms of quality of art or quality of writing or whatever it might be. Maybe it's because normally writing and art are two separate disciplines, and maybe that's hard enough. And then when you bring them together, like, maybe that kind of makes it even more difficult to access. But I really do think it would be great if there were more people just simply giving it a go and putting their ideas down. And of course, the flip side to social media and its positive impact is its negative impact as well. The idea that someone can hijack a green frog and then take it and mutate its meaning and make it into something quite nasty and sinister, and that the original creator, you know, doesn't seem to have any power to be able to kind of claw that thing back. Although I believe the cartoonist for the frog was Pepe, wasn't it? Pepe the frog was undertaking some kind of legal action to try and reclaim some of that stuff. And I recently came across, and I don't know if this has any applicability, but I can't remember where I actually saw it now, but they've done a research study, some psychologists and computer scientists, that supported a theory that the brain prefers artworks that appear to have been created with natural human-like movements, which I thought was really interesting. And is that why? I don't know. To me, I've always been trying to sort of unlock, because someone will always ask, oh, why do you like doing this, or why do you like comics? And it's like, and I can say, well, I always have. I've seemed to have been drawn to these things, but the fact that there's people out there maybe doing studies around this stuff, explaining why, and I think it's the idea that if you can see that it's been made by a human being, that there's something in it that actually is intrinsically attractive, which is hopefully a really good counter argument to all the people using AI. That's another topic.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that I found when I was doing the We Are Beneficiaries project, is that I was thinking about ways to kind of share stories from people, and actually sitting down and drawing their faces or whatever they wanted to be drawn of them, because sometimes they didn't want their faces, they wanted a symbol. That just the act of that was a gift back to them to say thank you for sharing your story, but it was also a way that I feel like it's really hard to ignore people when you're looking at them in the eye. And I think that's kind of what you had mentioned before, Michel, is that as you're scrolling, you can zoom past words, because we see words all the time, but there's something about words and pictures together that somehow kind of elevate both things at once, that make you just kind of absorb it. And I think that's the power of and subversiveness of comics as well, is that there's something that aren't always taken seriously or seem a bit confusing to people, or because of the breadth of what a comic can be, and can be, you know, very sophisticated drawings to very naive styles and everything in between, that people are like, oh, I'm not sure about this medium, which therein for me lies that power of it. One of our panelists who's not here today, Kay, started drawing on Tumblr, and their comics ended up getting picked up by an American publisher and put into print. And I think we're seeing something about one of the good aspects of social media is that democratization of space is changing the print medium as well, and having kind of publishers kind of have to catch up with the diversity that exists in comics. Michel, I know that you are kind of pushing your way through and making more space for tangata moana stories to be told and to be put both online as well as in print. Do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, especially in this industry, like comics and cartoons, you'll be hard fought to find any other kind of information around tangata moana creators. Like if you Google Samoan comic artist, like I'm pretty much the only result for like 5 pages. So it's pretty slim pickings. But in saying that, so many creators I've been seeing, because I'm always keeping an eye out as someone that's been navigating this space fairly on their own as a Samoan person. I'm always on the lookout, and through social media, I've been seeing more and more tangata moana creatives creating comics or illustrative works and stuff, or cartooning. And so I'm always kind of putting names forward as well as part of this group, and that's I guess why I'm here as well, as in terms of like it's one of the things I want in the spaces to be able to highlight, spotlight, advocate for the tangata moana creatives, and so definitely that democratization of creativity in terms of social media and the internet, right? You don't have to go through the gates of the gatekeepers and whatnot. You can build your own community and through online spaces. So it's been really interesting, and I'm really excited, to be honest. I'm really excited to see the future and whatnot, and so it's great.
I feel like the same is happening within queer storytelling as well, and that's kind of my background and who I am as well. That a lot of there's a lot of queer stories that maybe were excluded out of publishing before, and now because they go viral online or people are just seeing them, and they're stories that maybe I started making comics because I hadn't seen anyone like me on television, and it's certainly cheaper to pick up a pen than convince your mates to come and star in a very badly made movie. And that seems to be a way that people are getting their ways in, and I see that within indigenous storytelling as well. With Huia Press is one of the biggest kind of publishers of Māori comics and in te reo, but I also see that kind of pushing out across heaps of different publishers now, and certainly in terms of the books that keep winning awards in the Children's Book Awards quite often are by Māori and are telling those pūrākau and myths and legends and stories from the New Zealand Indigenous perspective.
Yeah,
I'm going to throw it over to...
I spent the week hanging out with Matt Tate, visiting schools, touring schools, and so that was so great to have like a Māori artist and a Samoan artist kind of talking to kids and stuff. And that, we were like, I joked with Matt. I was like, "Oh, what's it like being an award-winning artist? Must be nice." But yeah, like that. Like you were talking about queer stories. Yes, I've been seeing an influx of queer stories. I've been seeing an influx of disabled stories as well. Again, the internet has allowed people to be able to share their stories without all of the drama and whatnot. And it's been great. It's been great to learn about other people's experiences. And I think that's why, again, another reason why comics are the visual medium and stories that aren't often told. It's just a very easy way to digest them, and the more stories that are told, the more people get to understand themselves. So.
And I just think there's actually so much space to do so much more than is currently being done. I think it would be great if publishers, more than even just Huia, actually embraced this art form and really allowed. I think my experience inside the publishing world, it's generally quite timid for obvious reasons. It's it is an industry. It has to be profitable. It has to make returns. But sometimes, like as we see, say with Hollywood or something, you sort of see something's successful, that seems to be the formula to make more stories, is to just replicate or seemingly replicate what someone else has done, rather than truly kind of expand the scope of what could be done. And I don't know how that's going to change, but I see positive steps in that there are more kinds of comic style format books being produced generally, and I mean it's one of the seem to occupy a fairly big space in libraries now, so there's a sort of acceptability, I guess, around the art form. But yeah, I would just be, I mean, you know, as Michel's alluded to, there's been the amount of new creators coming through is in leaps and bounds is kind of exciting. It's almost impossible to keep up, which is a good thing. And we're great to sort of just see more of that content making its way out into the world. I suppose Kay at our last online meeting said that their advice to new creators was actually not worry about print. So I'm probably too old school worrying about paper, and that digital is where it is. The digital is where it's all happening. You just forget about that stuff. Just make your stuff, put it out there, keep making stuff. You'll find an audience, I suppose, if I'm accurately kind of paraphrasing what Kay's statement was last time. But yeah, it'd be cool to sort of just, I don't know, just see more, I guess, more of kind of both streams.
And I feel like I mean, I've watched comics in New Zealand go from being so marginal and with no infrastructural support and no publishers able to do it here, and you know, just completely on the fringes when I was at university in the 80s, to now when there's at least one kind of dedicated graphic novel publisher, Earth's End, who bring out about a graphic novel a year roughly, and also lots of publishers that are dabbling in comics as well. So as you mentioned, Hui, you know, they've published many. They've published about 5 or 6 graphic novels now, and most of those are also available in Te Reo Māori. So that's a huge shift. There's still a long way to go with publishing here, and my office here at the university is just upstairs from where Whitirea Welltech teaches its publishing postgraduate diploma, which is a fantastic program. There's many publishers, you know, many people working in publishing now have gone through that program. And the current cohorts moving through there, every year I have a couple of them come upstairs to me and say, I really want to be publishing graphic novels. Tell me how to do it. And I'm like, well, you tell me. But what's happening, I think, is that there are more and more people who've grown up with, you know, really interesting graphic novels who are now moving into the publishing industry and really wanting to publish them. And so I think we're going to see more and more happening here. And I just want to do a shout out here because as an enormous lifelong fan of librarians, it's been libraries that have been really at the forefront of getting graphic novels to the public in the last 30 years. It's been, I mean, libraries have been way ahead of bookshops and publishing in New Zealand on this. And so a big thank you, because honestly, it's a long struggle getting comics and graphic novels in front of people. But it's libraries that have really done most of the work. Most of the mahis have been done by libraries in the last 30 years. So I'm very, very appreciative of that. And also shout out to, there's some familiar faces here. So it's really lovely to see some of the librarians that I know and love here today.
I think we'll throw it over to the audience for questions in a couple of minutes, but to give you some time before I'll have a final question, I think, Dylan, what you said just kind of leads quite well into it. given that this audience are people who work in documentary heritage, collecting materials, but also lots of librarians who are kind of looking at their collections around what would be lendable and things, what are some ways in which librarians and LIANZA can work to help foster and support storytelling through comic and cartoons in Aotearoa? That was not a pre-organised question, I apologise. One of the things that I was thinking about is zines, because I rattle on about zines quite a lot at my work, and I feel like those are ways where lots of diverse storytelling happens, because it's just people who have just this deep passion inside of them to create, and they often spend their own money doing that. And I really like that there's heaps of libraries around New Zealand who have zine libraries that they call for collections, and they go out to zine fests, and that's a way of getting things in. So that was the thing that I had on top. But do any of you have any suggestions or things that you want to say, given you've got a captive audience right now?
I'd tautoko that the idea of zine making again is a sort of tangential related, so sometimes they include comics and sometimes they just include other kinds of material, but again shows that anybody can kind of get in there and make them, and everyone has a story that they can tell. I've seen some really interesting ideas of zines being used inside the classroom as a really sort of clever activity for students to be able to kind of bring things together. You know, again, if you can't draw, for example, there's been a really interesting discussion going on here in the chat. A lot of zines use pre-made materials like magazines, and so there's been some really interesting things where people have been able to use that, leverage the power of that kind of activity, and basically empower students to kind of both do an activity but also facilitate some kind of learning, and also produce an output at the end of it. And I mean, I've worked in the past with all kinds of different students, but I particularly remember working with animation students who were not your average student, that they came and already being able to draw relatively well, often better than I could, for example, at the similar age, and often better than I could do now. And that was amazing to be able to work with them, because I remember some advice early on was that the students were highly practical and somewhat theory averse, was how it was given to me. So, okay, well, what do they like doing? Oh, they like to draw. Okay, so we'll teach them stuff, we'll teach them theory, but we'll find practical ways to kind of cement this stuff. And a lot of it just involved drawing. And just like, yeah, you let creative people do creative things. And the learning just happens as a kind of, as a consequence of that. And again, tackling the thing of libraries, which have been really supportive. Libraries often host all kinds of workshops in their various spaces. Sometimes they're dedicated makerspace areas, but sometimes it's just libraries getting in people that can pass on knowledge and skills, and then getting in students and patrons and stuff to sort of sit around tables and make stuff. I think that's a really valuable way of just, again, really kind of selling the idea that anybody can pick this art form up.
Dylan or Michel, do you have anything else to add, or should we kick it over to the audience?
I'll just very, very briefly add that the other role that libraries play, which is really essential, and obviously this is central to what you're doing, Sam, is libraries are archives. And the history of comics in New Zealand goes way back, like political cartooning goes back to the 19th century. and comics goes back at least to the 1920s in New Zealand. I mean, this is a 1930s newspaper supplement from the Auckland Star from the 1930s, and that included New Zealand comics. And sometimes, you know, there's a lot of that material spread through libraries all across the country. Your library might be the only place that has a particular thing, especially after the terrible microfiche culling of newspapers back in the day. So treasure the fact that you are also archives. Every library is an archive. It's not just the Turnbull. And look for what you might have. You might have little treasures hidden there that no one else has in New Zealand, some comic or cartoon that someone produced, 40 years ago, printed up 50 copies and somehow managed to sneak it into a library. And also there's a huge need for historical research around New Zealand comics. It's a blank slate. There's been very little written. There's a book by Adrian Kinnaird. There's a few other things scattered around, but we need a lot more, and libraries are central to that as well.
Yeah, I got not much to add, very much echoing those sentiments. Libraries have always kind of been, especially in this country, at the forefront of promoting comics and cartoons as a valid medium for storytelling. So cheers, love you guys.
Do we have any questions from the audience? You can feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away, or pop your hand up, or pop it in the chat and I can read them out. But yeah, I feel like I did some research the other day where I was looking through the Junior Digests, an old 1940s and 50s comic series, and it looks like maybe the person who did one of New Zealand's first sci-fi comic series was a woman, and I've been trying to kind of verify that, going through all of the different issues of there's hundreds and hundreds of them, and trying to work out the signature. Is that a signature or is that a scribble? I'm not sure. Get my little magnifying glass out. But these are the things. There's so many mysteries within cartoons and comics history because there's simply just not enough written research done about it. It's mostly in people's heads that they remember, and so I just really encourage that. We've got a question. How do you think the slow death of the American industry will affect New Zealand comics publishing?
I have an answer if I can jump in, having worked in the American comics industry. There's only one part of the American comics industry that's dying, and that's the superhero comics published by DC and Marvel. That's that monthly superhero comic in the comic shop. That's been struggling for a long time. It has blips where it grows, but it's been declining since the 1950s. What's happened is that genre has moved over into the movies and television and exploded, but the comics have been kind of left behind as an industry. But actually, that is a very small part of the comics industry in North America and around the world. The most popular comics in North America now are graphic novels, particularly for children and young adults, and then manga, and then, all sorts of graphic novels for adults and non-fiction graphic novels and graphic memoirs. All those things are booming. They're just getting more and more and more popular every year. And so the New Zealand comics industry, we don't have a Marvel DC style superhero comics industry to grow or wither. What we do have is alternative underground comics and graphic novels and people doing web comics and webtoons, and so all of those things are booming. They're exploding and they're growing. So my short answer is it won't affect New Zealand's comics publishing at all. It's a good question though, because it's happening.
We've got another excellent question from Monty as well. Popular successful authors like Kay O'Neill and Rachel Smythe don't seem to get considered for book awards here. which I think is strange. Is there a reason maybe, and how could we broaden the criteria maybe to include groundbreaking work by New Zealand authors who majorly create for overseas audiences?
Yeah, that's a that's a good one, because like I'm always wherever I go, I'm always singing Kay and Rachel's international success. They're singing their praises and stuff. I was at Whangarei Girls High and they had Laura Olympus on the shelf in the library, and I was like, "Oh, you got Laura Olympus?" Like, yeah, it's really popular. I go, "You know Rachel's a Kiwi, right?" And they were like, "No." I'm like, "Yeah, now you have something to sell. Like, you can tell these girls that they can make stuff like this, and it's crazy to me, because and I guess it's that whole finding success outside of the, I guess, prescribed notions of like the gatekeepers, right? You didn't go through, like I go through it as well, like where you've kind of forged your own path outside of what is kind of like, these are the pathways to success in this country. And so those people aren't aware of you, or if they are, they try not to acknowledge you, because it kind of shows a failing of their system and whatnot. So yeah, I have no idea how we can change that, other than like continually trying to signal boost and let people be aware of it. But it's criminal. It's such a sad state of affairs that people like Rachel and Kay are so damn successful. Like I caught up with Rachel at San Diego, and I said to her, like, "Hey, you're the reigning and defending Eisner Award-winning best webcomic 2 years in a row." So yeah, it's interesting. I would love, like, I see Margaret Mahy. I would love that kind of reverence for Rachel and Kay's work, like a Margaret Mahy or Joy Cowley kind of thing. There's they're that next generation, but like back home again, I don't know why there's silence. I don't hang in those circles, so I'm not familiar with why.
I think if anyone has any sway with any book awards and wanted to add a cartoons and comics category, or start your own, if you have some access to a patron to start that, there, I feel like we've maybe had some cartoons and comics awards that pop up every now and again, and kind of a half-hearted jokes because people are like, "Oh, not really sure about this yet." But to me, I feel like the caliber of cartoons and comics being created in New Zealand is just phenomenal, and it's really sorely lacking that there are no awards for that, which, because Creative New Zealand relies on you to be able to show that you're award-winning, makes it really hard as well to progress your career, particularly in an international way.
And I'd note that that overseas graphic novels have now been nominated, shortlisted, and even won almost all of the major book prizes in the US, the UK, Australia. It's been like a tsunami, if I can reference Ned Wenlock's recent New Zealand graphic novel. It's been a tsunami of graphic novels sweeping across book awards. And you can create a special category, and some book awards have done that, but a lot of them, they've simply recognized, oh, this is actually one of the strongest books published this year in any category. And I feel like it would be very nice to have a bit more, awareness among the one awards category where graphic novels have done very well in New Zealand is in the Children's Book Awards. But there, it often, the difficulty, because friends of mine have been on the juries and so on, and the difficulty is, where do we put this? So we end up with what is actually quite an adult graphic novel winning the prize for Best Picture Book of the Year, and it becomes very awkward and strange. So yeah, I think the awards could just pay a little more attention primarily.
I believe that we have come to the end of the session, unfortunately. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I feel like we could continue on for a long time after, but the session will be recorded, and thank you, LIANZA, for hosting us. Really appreciate it. Thank you to Dylan, Zak and Michel. It's been wonderful to chat, and yeah.
Would you like to do a karakia to finish everything off, Sam, or would you like us to do it?
I can do it for sure.
Okay. Kia ora.
Unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, te hinangaro, I te ara takatū, koia rā e rongo, whakairea ki runga, kia wātia, ai rā kua wātia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.